This is review of the DJI FPV drone. FPV drone for beginners that's fun but flaws. With the DJI FPV, flying is fun in capital letters. Thanks to the DJI goggles, you get an incredibly immersive flying experience, and the forward-facing camera shows equally compelling video. But the experience isn't all plain sailing. FPV acrobatics are hard, and it has a flight time of around 10 minutes, so it's a lot more complicated and niche than DJI's other drones. DJI FPV is an interesting drone. Drones with FPV, first-person view, offer the most immersive flying experience, with video goggles that give you a bird's-eye view. Usually, they're custom or self-built and not the easiest to fly, until now. DJI's FPV drone allows anyone with a bit of pocket money to experience the exciting world of FPV. Flying is awesome, but how long will the novelty last? Do you think it's as good as DJI's Mavic line of drones? In terms of user-friendliness, the DJI FPV pretty much matches the Mavic in terms of convenience, comfort and value. The normal mode makes it easy for beginners to fly, and it's a good entry-level FPV drone. In manual mode, FPV pros can practice their skills and capture high-quality footage. DJI FPV is designed mainly for shooting 4K FPV video, but it can also take stills at a basic level, so you shouldn't buy it for stills. FPV drones let you shoot videos with the thrill of first-person view, almost like flying. For the most part, the DJI FPV can shoot 4K video at 60 fps or 1080p at 120 fps. However, even with lens correction, the camera still takes pictures and videos of the propellers at the front. In real-world situations, the battery only lasts about 10 minutes, so it's best to shoot fast. DJI FPV works right out of the box. Charging everything up, installing DJI Fly, updating the firmware, and you're ready. Couple this with how easy the DJI FPV is in normal mode, and it's easy to see why it's so popular. There are, however, some downsides. This drone is not only expensive once you add all the extra accessories, but it's also a lot more basic than a standard drone, both in terms of features and flying. You'll have to wear FPV goggles to fly the DJI FPV. Besides following your country's drone laws, more info here, you'll also need to have an observer with you who has a good line of sight to the drone while it's in the air. This doesn't mean the world is coming to an end, but it does mean that when you fly outdoors, you never do it alone, you always need an observer with you. The flying experience is fun, but ultimately niche. There's a DJI FPV bundle right now, with a few options. You'll get the drone, remote controller, DJI FPV goggles V2 and one battery with the DJI FPV combo pack for $1,299, £1,249, $2,099 Australian dollars. DJI also has a Fly More kit, but it's a little different from the ones it usually offers. For $299, £259, $429 Australian dollars, you just buy 2 extra batteries and a charging hub, instead of a bundle that includes the drone and some batteries. Also available is the optional motion controller, which uses your hand movements to steer the drone, and costs $199, £139, $229 Australian dollars separately. This quadcopter features a typical quadcopter design that, excluding the motor arms, is similar in size to the DJI Mavic Air 2. DJI FPV weighs 795 grams, so it's barely lighter than DJI Mavic 2 Pro. DJI FPV isn't big or heavy, but the fixed design means it'd be a good idea to get a specific bag or case for it, since it doesn't fit well into regular camera bags. One of the options is the DJI Goggles Carry More backpack for $119, £109, $169 Australian dollars. That's not included in the DJI Fly More kit, which is only a charging hub and 2 extra batteries. The gimbal can only tilt vertically, since it's an FPV drone. Video footage is kept smooth with DJI Osmo Action's image stabilization. You can store the battery in your pocket while you're using the DJI FPV Goggles V2. Our testing showed that long-distance, low-latency transmission never faltered. The camera's 1440 by 810 resolution produces a beautifully clear picture, too. But the view is so big you have to look at the sides of the screen to read flight info. The goggles also take some getting used to, because it's not as easy as using a phone on a controller. There's no cradle for attaching a phone to the new DJI FPV Controller V2 since it's designed to work with the DJI FPV Goggles V2. That's not surprising since FPV drones perform best when flown with goggles, instead of trying to watch the feed on a phone or tablet. However, for those who wanted to use DJI FPV as a drone, it would have been a nice option. The controller features a minimalist design and large buttons that are easy to use when using the goggles and flying the drone. You just have to memorize the positions of the 6 buttons, including a customizable custom button and a dial to control the camera angle. It's easy to store the control sticks in the controller handles when not in use. DJI FPV isn't like other self or custom-built FPV drones in that owners can't fix damage themselves if they crash. If you crash the FPV, DJI Care Refresh will take care of it, but if all you need is a new motor arm, it's expensive. You can get up to 2 replacement drones with DJI Care Refresh for $199, £189, $319 for a year. The first drone costs an additional $259, £249, $419 and the second one is an additional $279, £269, $469. The drone and controller are both available separately, as are propellers and accessories like cameras, but at $739, £659, $1,139 for just the drone, it's an expensive replacement. DJI Care Refresh would be prudent if crash damage were a concern, but this adds to the cost. For perspective, that FPV combo at $1,299, £1,249, $2,099 suddenly becomes a whopping $1,916, £1,806, $3,016 when you throw in the Fly More bundle. The DJI goggles carry more backpack and 1 year of DJI Care Refresh. The official Phantom backpack costs less than a DJI Phantom 4 Pro V2.0. Drones that are traditionally used for FPV are generally self-built racing models that are harder to fly, and therefore easier to crash, than consumer drones. As with the Mavic series, DJI has taken its expertise from the Mavic range to create the FPV. It has flight modes for beginner and experienced pilots alike. In normal mode, you'll start with GPS and use the front and bottom visual positioning sensors. In this mode, the drone behaves just like other DJI drones, and will hover in place when the controls are released. But this DJI FPV isn't like the company's other drones. When an obstacle is detected, the Mavic series will stop, but the FPV will slow down and alert you. You have to adjust flight yourself to avoid a collision. The DJI FPV still needs a lot of care even in normal mode. In manual mode, GPS and collision sensors are off, so it's for experienced FPV pilots. The reason for this is that experienced FPV pilots can perform aerial stunts and fly through tight spaces with speed. This mode isn't for the faint-hearted or inexperienced. This isn't for inexperienced or timid players. You'll have a steep learning curve even if you're a veteran drone pilot. The sport mode combines some of the maneuverability of the manual mode with some of the safety features of the normal mode. For a closer look at the speed, you can go up to 87 miles per hour in manual mode, 0 to 62 miles per hour in 2 seconds, 60 miles per hour in sport mode, and 33 miles per hour in normal mode. DJI's FPV isn't as feature-packed as their usual stuff. There aren't any automated flying modes. Aside from the flight modes geared toward all levels of drone flying skills, FPV is the drone's biggest USP since it is much easier to use than traditional FPV. A DJI FPV is advertised as having a 20-minute flight time, but that's with 25 miles per hour windless conditions, so it's doubtful. It took about 10 minutes for a battery to fly in our tests, and it always depends on the conditions. It's still way better than standard FPV drones. DJI's FPV camera has a 12MP f/.3 CMOS sensor and a 1466mm equivalent lens with 150-degree field of view and f/2.8 aperture. It's said to have a fixed focus range of 0.6 meters to infinity, which means the whole shot will be in focus. Both amateurs and professionals will be satisfied. A large amount of cinematic and creative potential is provided by the camera's ability to shoot immersive 4K video at 50/60 fps and 1080p video at 50/60/100/120 fps. You can also capture video footage in standard and Dji-like color profiles at up to 120 megabits per second. The 4K and 1080p video are mostly what you'd expect from a DJI drone, aside from the front propellers being captured despite the lens correction. That's why you should have the latter on, since it removes the barrel/fisheye distortion your lens creates, but you'll need to crop your aerial footage and stills to get rid of the propellers. You'll always have to crop if you turn off lens correction. Stills can only be shot in auto or manual mode and they'll be JPEG. The camera doesn't shoot in RAW and it doesn't have any auto modes either, so we can't shoot RAW or video automatically. I'm using this drone for FPV video. Taking stills or video in a hover can be tricky because the drone will tilt to hold position when there's a side wind. The horizontal axis of the gimbal isn't moving, so your still images will be at an angle, see above. Another difference between the FPV DJI series and the Mavic series is their gimbals that compensate for this tilt and level the camera.